for watching this Life Solved short. In these videos, we meet the University of Portsmouth researchers featured in this season's Life Solved podcast. I'm Robin Montague. It's awards season, and with the ceremonies and accolades often comes headlines as actors and filmmakers use the platform to speak out on issues in their industry and society at large. And thanks to the coverage, these can often create powerful conversations in the wider society. To discuss the relationship between progressive change in the TV and film industry, I'm joined by Professor Deborah Shaw, who leads research in the School of Film, Media and Communication here at the University of Portsmouth. Hi, Deborah.
Hello.
So, Deborah, before we get into the topic, I just want to hear a little bit more about your research interests, because you're particularly looking into the representation in film. So what was it drew you into that?
Well, I come from a background of Latin American and Spanish studies, and I was very aware when I first started researching film that so many representations of Latin Americans, so let's say Mexicans, were really negative. They were equated with, drug dealers and criminals, violent, lower IQ. And having been to Mexico, and that's where I did my PhD, and seeing that had no resemblance to any reality I knew, that made me very angry. So part of my work was studying those representations, looking at questions of stereotypes, racism, the way in which Hollywood constructs another in order often to feel better about itself. So I wanted to do research into that and correct those misconceptions in my work.
And you said there, you mentioned you did your PhD in Mexico. What was that like? What was it like studying out there?
Well, I did my PhD at King's College London, but it was on Mexican women writers. And so obviously I had to have periods of time in Mexico working with scholars there. And it was a fantastic experience. Mexico City is an incredible city, some of the friendliest people in the world, some of the best food in the world. Incredibly educated people. I'd meet engineers in bookshops that loved reading literature. So it just gave me, I'm not saying every Mexican is like that, but I just had a very good experience of my time in Mexico. Yeah.
And a subject that you now obviously teach to students as well. How do you find they engage with representation? Are they quite passionate about it too?
Very much so. I teach a course. One of the courses I teach is called Gender, Sexuality and Cinema. And the students are really engaged. Often I learn from them about changing ways in which we've conceptualized gender and sexuality. It's something they're very interested in. And there's a kind of give and take between what I can teach them, what they can teach me. But yeah, it's something they're very invested in, clearly, because it affects their identities.
And you said there the changing ways of sort of representation and gender specifically.
Yeah.
How has that evolved?
It's been really interesting over the years. I've taught this course for many years, and obviously we've changed it as texts change and representations changed. But things that were very, very marginal and very hard to find, for example, representations of lesbians, of trans people, were often very, very marginal. And now we find that I'm not saying it's mainstream, but there are many more film and television series that engage with identities that would have been considered very marginal in the past.
Do you use any examples in your lessons?
I use lots of examples. One week I've just finished doing was on trans representation in film and television, and there's a fantastic documentary called Disclosure that we watch, which really, I always say to the students, it kind of does our work for us, because it's got trans creatives and writers and actors who basically reflect on representations of trans people in the film industry over time and on television industry, and look at what's changed, the damaging tropes, the fact that trans people are often cast as predators or deviants, and how that started to change over time with more trans people actually, having access to making television and films.
So you mentioned there about having them giving them more access, giving different types of people, better variety of people more access to making films and TV. How important is that for the actual representation of the shows and the movies? Is it, you have more people in the acting roles that are more representational, but what about the people behind the scenes?
I think that's hugely important, and I think the film industry is starting to realise how important that is. There was a kind of hashtag Oscars So White in 2015 when they realised that all of the acting nominees were white. And that combined with Me Too and the scandal of Harvey Weinstein, the fact that so many women were being sexually harassed or even raped in the film industry, it's really made the film industry take stock and make some changes. And what I think the change has been is that it's not just good enough to have more representation of a certain demographic that had been marginalised, but we actually need people from communities that have been marginalised to be directing, writing, producing, acting, in behind the scenes roles, distribution, exhibition. And there have been active measures to increase diversity. I mean, I'm talking here about Hollywood, but also the British film industry via initiatives by the BFI. I think there's just more awareness of imbalances, really.
And they have to make quite a conscious effort to be more representative. Are you hoping that this will eventually evolve to be, it happens naturally? It doesn't have to be as tick boxy, if that makes sense.
I think you have to have the tick box for things to then happen naturally. So you have to make the film industry take a good look at itself in order to realise you have to have the eyes to see the absences that there are, because otherwise it just becomes naturalised and people don't see it. So, for example, there've been some diversity initiatives in Hollywood that just for a film to be eligible for an Oscar, this is going to take effect in 2024, films have to meet certain diversity targets. So there has to have a proportion of people, for example, in the cast and crew from ethnic minorities or with disabilities or from sexual or people who were marginalised in terms of sexuality or gender identity. So they have to show they've done that in 2 or 4 categories in order to even be eligible to be awarded for an Oscar. That will make the industry look at itself and make changes. So what may start as a tick box, hopefully will then become an organic process. But I think just hoping that things happen, things don't just happen. We have to, have certain initiatives for those things to happen.
And we've touched on the Oscars a fair bit. Just for anyone who isn't aware then, why has the Oscars been sort of tarnished with this kind of this view that it is not very representative and that it has a lot of issues when it comes to representation, race, gender, all of that?
Well, I think it was, because of the Motion Picture Academy, who are the members vote for the Oscars, for the nominations, et cetera, and the awards. Basically, after Oscars So White, people took a look at the membership and realised that it was very largely, I haven't got the figures in my head, but, in the sort of 80, 90% for its whole history was very largely male and very largely white. So older white men, I don't want to be discriminated against elder white men, but generally people vote for what they know and what's in their demographic. So the Academy itself has taken steps to diversify its membership. They wanted to increase women, they wanted to increase people of colour, many more members from different nationalities. And that has started, it's still predominantly male and white, but they have started to bring in younger members of more diverse communities. And that's already seeing a shift in how people are voting and what kind of films people are even aware of, the films that are on their radar, for example.
A lot of the arguments, especially on social media, that seem to be that, what if it is just based on the quality, maybe the quality of the actors or the quality of the productions? Yes, they may predominantly be white or all white in these instances. But what if it's just because they are better? What would you say to that as an argument?
Well, I would say that I think that's a sort of false argument, because that would be saying that members of diverse communities can't have that quality. And I think it's just about opportunity. I would use the term opportunity rather than quality. If you give equal opportunity, then of course it's a meritocracy. You want the best actor. But why would the best actor only come from one demographic, whatever that demographic may be? That's clearly a skewed argument. So we need more opportunity and more access to a broader range of people. It's not a complicated argument, and it's not about discriminating against white men either. It's just about opening the doors so that more people can come in.
Definitely, and I suppose if you go back in time as well, this is a similar sort of argument when it came to gender in motion pictures and stuff, and how women were perceived.
Yeah, absolutely. And, there has been an argument as well, but why have so few women been nominated for Best Director. So you had the Ava DuVernay, whose film Selma was nominated for Best Film, but she wasn't nominated for Best Director. And that year there were no women directors nominated. So if your film's good enough to be nominated for Best Film, why isn't she good enough to be nominated for Best Director? I mean, we have seen shifts. So we had Chloe Zhao, for example, who won the Oscar last year for Nomadland. She won for Best Director. So we are starting to see shifts, but I think women have really again been marginalised from being recognised for their work and also being given the opportunity to direct the types of films that are going to be recognised in high profile events like the Oscars. And I think that's starting to change.
Thank you so much for talking with me today, Deborah. It was really fascinating. If you'd like to hear the full interview with Deborah, listen to the Life Solved podcast on the University of Portsmouth website or your favourite podcast app now. Just search for Life Solved. You can click the link in the comments box below or head to port.ac.uk/research to find out more. See you again next time.